Okay, well, we are live, but no, we're not live. It said, you don't have LinkedIn. They tricked me again.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky thing.
But I'll go back and add gray line Facebook. Which else do I want to add? Gray line Facebook then. Okay. Okay, now we're going to go. Let's see. Oh, no, we've been live that whole time. That's what I was telling you.
I love the transparency of it.
Well, so that's the thing. So, by the way, those of you that are tuning into another Catalyst Talks, I'm Joseph Kopser with Chelsea Collier, founder of DigiCity, one of my favorite people in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of fixing stuff and getting stuff done. What you saw there for 30 seconds was, quite frankly, the unending quest to figure out how I get on LinkedIn Live. I'm not there yet, Chelsea. Are you there?
Me neither, if it makes you feel any better. Yeah.
How are you doing these days? How are things?
You know, doing relatively well given the current state of the world. I think when things get really tough, it's an opportunity to look at what we can be grateful for. So I choose to concentrate on that.
Absolutely. Well, that is a perfect sentiment. So for those of you that do see this either on YouTube or Facebook, this is live. I love doing these live, especially, as Chelsea and I said, when they're unscripted, because you never know what's going to happen. But if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to jump in chat down below in Facebook or YouTube and ask any questions you have. If not, she and I are just going to catch up with everything that's been going on in her world, perspectives on the changes that have occurred, whether it be from the COVID standpoint, whether it be the upheaval since George Floyd, whatever it is that we want to get into. By all means, let's hop into it. But first thing I want to lead off with is you've been doing a lot of webinars with DigiCity. And so take a minute to explain to folks what DigiCity is in case they haven't seen you or worked with DigiCity before.
Yeah, so DigiCity is a platform that's focused on smart cities. So before COVID-19, that was both an in-person events platform and an information online platform. So obviously, we've moved everything online, not celebrating a pandemic, of course, but it has certain advantages to where now everyone around the world can tune in to what we're talking about, which is smart city issues focused on social and civic issues.
How do you define a smart city?
I define a smart city as the connected technology. So it's all about fiber and infrastructure, devices that capture data, and then delivering that data so communities can make smarter decisions. And when they're making smarter decisions, it's not just about the efficiency of delivering city services, it's also about improving the quality of life for the people who live in our communities. And one piece that I think is really important is providing additional access to prosperity. You know, as we're looking at the results of this really challenging time, not only for our local communities, but for our world, you know, access to prosperity and pipelines for what comes next is really important. So a smart city is essentially technology applied to make all of that easier.
So let's dig down into the word access. The fact of the matter is you could have a world-class public transportation system. You could have world-class public schools. You could have world-class parks. But if all the people in the community don't have access, it doesn't do much good. So how does your work really improve that access, and how does data make it easier?
Yeah. So my philosophy is that everything that we need to create truly connected, accessible communities already exists. All of the different things are already there. They're just contained in different sectors. So my job, self-appointed job through DigiCity, is to increase the connectivity between all of the different nodes, whether that's industry, startups, academia, of course, government, social advocates, and just simply the people who live in cities. And, you know, one of the things that I really appreciate about your work, Joseph, is that you are just wired to do that, and you do it constantly, no matter what world that you're in, and you've been at the top of so many of them. So I just really appreciate your work, and always happy to chat and hear what's happening with you too.
Well, so let's take a couple of them. Jobs releases just came out. This is August 7th, which is really like the 14th millionth day of March, April-ish. And
We're all so tired.
Yeah, the job numbers were actually pretty good compared to some of the previous weeks. However, we still have tens of millions of people that are out of work. There's a lot of discussion about seeing how you can take whatever you're working on and move it over into another sector, or this is your chance to work on a side hustle, a chance for education and retraining. But that's hard. So what are you hearing? What are you seeing in terms of the future of work or skills or job training?
Yeah, well, when the pandemic first kind of hit, and we experienced it, of course, in Austin, Texas, kind of round about the time of South by Southwest in early March, I just felt this great alarm come up about things that we've been thinking about and talking about for a long time, which is upskilling, reskilling, automation, and particularly how that impacts marginalized and vulnerable communities. So I've been just on a path to discover every single organization, nonprofit, for-profit, everything in between, government-led, whatever it is, who's really leading in this sector, and then think about identifying what they need to kind of accelerate and serve more people, because the need is obviously growing. And, just making sure that everyone has access to a tech-enabled job if they choose to go through that path. So one of the interesting conversations that I had just earlier today was with the president of Per Scholas, Plenio Ayala, and just what an awesome organization. And they've looked at the pandemic and all of the challenges that come with this, not as a way to throw up hands and say, oh gosh, so many challenges we can't face. They're looking at it as, how can we expand and serve more people? So I just think it's a cool time for people to come together and get really busy about what needs to happen, regardless of what sector you're in and regardless of what barriers are there.
Well, well said. And I'm a big fan of all the quick fixes. Like, what can we do right now to fix the problems we see? And to your point, access. I mean, let's talk literally about access and figuratively. So I'm working on a blog right now that's getting at this notion of, what do we do about all these kids that are not going to be able to return to the classroom for all kinds of reasons that we're discussing here? But at home, they do not have access to the internet. They don't have access to even devices to get on the internet. So one of the things I proposed at a conference I spoke at on Tuesday, the Association for Commuter Transportation, was, look, many of your organizations have buses that are not running, or not all the buses that are running. You have shuttle vans, not all the shuttle vans are running, and even school buses, they're not all running. I hope that they can emulate what best practices have been done in some cities. Austin, Texas is one of them, of using those vehicles as mobile hotspots in communities to give them access. What are some of the other best practices you might have seen going on in places that are worth sharing?
Yeah, no, I think, and that's a really good kind of, let's fix this right now and provide access to whoever needs it right away. Some of the longer term solutions, I think this is a real catalyst. Yes, I'm going to use that word for looking at, why are we in this state? Why is the digital divide so pervasive in these American cities? And what were the things that led to that? And then what can we do to fix that? Not about crying over spilled milk, but here we are in this situation. What do we need to do going forward? And to me, the answer, whether you're talking about connectivity or data, is all about transparency. Open up, get everybody in the room, talk very candidly about what you need and what you don't need and who can solve those needs. And let's just roll up sleeves and be entrepreneurial about it. It's almost like, can we just introduce a Scrum session and agile thinking into our cross-sector city and private sector overlaps? And let's fix it.
By the way, you win the Jeopardy or bingo card for all the coolest words that you just used there with Agile and Scrum. But really what you're saying to folks that aren't necessarily in this technology space, let's just roll up our sleeves. If we need to go to a whiteboard, maybe separately, but let's just figure out what works and what doesn't work. And I'm a big fan of fail fast. Just get it out there, see what works. So in terms of helping people figure out what to fix now, I loved your point about this idea that a lot of these things existed before, we just didn't see it. Or worse, It existed before and too many people didn't care. So
Mhm.
one that I want to highlight is we talk about high-speed internet, whether it be for access for education, online jobs, even entertainment, quite frankly, Netflix and gaming.
Sure.
But it also
Telehealth, we're right in the middle of all that. Yeah.
right, and that's where I want to go now is this idea of telehealth.
Great.
So the Center for Rural Innovation has a wonderful map. If I had more than two hands, I could link to that while you and I are talking. But what they're trying to do is highlight the fact that we can talk all about telehealth all we want, but in rural America and in many places inside of our cities, we don't even have broadband. We don't even have it. However, the irony of it is the fiber is often under the ground, but it's dark.
Right.
And by dark, we mean there's no data or bits going through it.
Yeah.
That is because our big folks like AT&T and Comcast and some of the big players said, whoa. Government may have laid that line when they were repairing roads or digging ditches for whatever other infrastructure reason. But you can't compete against a private company. That's unfair. So then the answer is, well, then you all, run the line to be able to connect broadband to these parts of cities and these parts of our rural country. And they just say, well, no, there's no economic incentive to do it because there's not enough customers out there. How does that sit with you? If you were king or queen for a day, what would you do to fix those kind of problems?
So I think that exact model, and I don't disagree with that as kind of the legacy challenge, but that's the way it happened in the past. So US Ignite actually came up with a series of I'll call them white papers. There's probably a fancy word for it, but they just released this where, yes, there's all this, whether it's federally funded or whether there was a local bond, there's dark fiber underneath city streets that local governments simply don't know what to do with. They can't activate it. So in my mind, it's part of this, let's get everybody together in a room and say, hey, we have infrastructure already laid. We don't need additional investment and more streets torn up and the permitting and regulatory process, which is antiquated and super bureaucratic in most cities. Why can't we just look at this and, hey, private sector, do you want to lease some of it? Like there are existing solutions, but it takes a different way of thinking. It takes a different conversation. And quite frankly, we have to just kind of like say, whoa, pause. Can we just, yes, acknowledge the past, but here we are today, and we have millions of people who don't have access, which is a moral imperative. What can we do to turn it on? Private sector, what do you need? What makes sense to you? Public sector, what do you need? How can we work together? And whether you're telecom, whether you're cable, whether there's all sorts of new solutions coming out every single day, but it just takes a new way of thinking. And we just have to get past what happened 20 years when telecom was breaking up. It's just an old conversation. And it's time to move on and get busy and look at something new.
Well, quite frankly, I think many of those old conversations are all being, brought back to the front. They're being ripped open by COVID. And as I like to tell people, COVID is not anything new. It is an accelerant, or in a shameless plug, it is a catalyst for all the other forces, what's going on in the world of globalization, automation, robots, you name it. So let's see. Michael says Chelsea 4, Bayern 0. So that's a soccer reference, which I appreciate. So let's turn to popular culture for a minute. Are you watching any of the return of the NBA or NFL and NHL and all the sporting events, or even college sports? Have you heard these discussions?
Oh gosh.
Well, I was going to say that was a lead in.
And I know that's going to make my popularity ratings, which I don't really care about anyway, go down to 0. But what I am doing is, paying attention to how can we recreate experiences, whether you're a sports fan or not, that are really important to us, while also honoring each other in the time that we're in and keeping ourselves and each other safe and protected. So, I wouldn't normally go to a big sports arena, so I wouldn't normally just watch it online, but there's all sorts of things that, I'm really missing.
Well, I appreciate you answering the question even before I was finished with it, which is good. It shows eagerness to pop in. But where I was going was, so the Pac-12 college sports, their football teams basically got together, the players, and said, look, there's been this controversy going on now for decades. One, you don't allow us to have any stipend or any job at all. If we even so much as look at another person who's standing there with a $20 bill, we are subject to potentially being in violation of NCAA rules. And number two, while we are doing really well here as players on your field for your team with our jersey on our back, you, the university or other entities, are taking our likeness and selling it to sporting games, jerseys, materials. All of that money goes either to the universities or the other entities. None of it is returned to the student athlete.
Yeah.
And then finally, we are uncertain about what's going on with COVID, and you want us to go out there and play football while you fill the stands and make money, again, off of our efforts with us getting, as you know, injuries, traumatic brain injuries in some cases. Sure. So I just think this is fascinating that COVID has once again served as the catalyst to accelerate the conversation. What are we doing in college sports? What is the right balance?
Right.
All kinds of it. So
yeah.
Let's jump into another area real quick, which is this notion of school and returning to school. We're both here in Texas, in Austin. They just said today or in the last 24 hours that now they're pushing the return to school, at least in classroom, back.
September 9th, is it? Yeah.
Well, I've heard it's going back into November the first time. So it'll start in September online. Yeah. But it'll be November before students are back in the classroom.
In person. Yeah.
What are you seeing across the country? What are you hearing from different colleagues or entities about what this looks like and what it means for the future of education and ultimately future of work?
Yeah. My heart immediately goes to single parents who have to work frontline jobs. Yep. And I wish I had a magic wand and a solution. I don't have that challenge. I don't have young kids, but I cannot imagine what it is like to be a single mother who has to show up for work, and what is she going to do with her young child versus children? Daycares aren't open, schools aren't open. How do you invite childcare opportunities? And, whether we're talking about broadband and Wi-Fi access or, how we're taking care of kids and the education system, we're all seeing these systematic issues come full front and center, and we have to look at, okay, what is not in with the best interest of the institution, what is in the best interest of those who are most vulnerable in our community? How do we just tear down all the barriers and think about how we come together as a community to solve these challenges, and not just talking, but to your point, quick solutions while looking at the long-term issues. And I think the work that you're doing, whether it's Gray Line Group or Catalyst Talks or US Tomorrow, you're one of the champions who's going above and beyond, and not just representing one institution, but saying, we have to think more systemically about this. There just is no other option.
Yeah. So Emily Ramshaw, a friend of mine, just formerly at the Texas Tribune, but just recently created a new news organization called the 19th.
Saw that. Really cool.
Yeah, in honor of the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote. Yeah. And they are focused on these issues, but they are taking it from the perspective of, let's make sure we're really clear the impact that it has on women and the impact that women are having. Yeah. And in their latest article, at least one of the latest newsletters I read, talking about this being the first recession for women, meaning that this COVID experience right now is having an outsized impact on women in a way that not enough people are talking about. And your point about access to childcare, access to, the opportunities to look out after people's kids, especially when they are key and essential.
Yeah. Yeah. The caretaking always falls to women. And whether that's just because naturally we show up in that way, or whether it's a default, I'm certainly not going to answer that question. I think other people are very qualified to do that based on historical research and, just quantitative research. But at the same time, it is the reality. So how do we take care of women and not just mothers, but caretakers in our community? What do they need, and how do we give it to them? I mean, I think sometimes we just overcomplicate things, and if we just focus on
you got the sandwich generation. Then you got the sandwich generation, people who are my age, I'm 49, who are old enough that our parents, we want to make sure, fortunately we're in a situation where our parents are doing well. Yeah. And then we've got our kids too. And we're lucky in this family that both ends of that sandwich, both pieces of bread, if you will, are doing well. But there's a lot of working Americans who are sandwiched between taking care of and looking out for their parents and their kids simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, well, we got just, let's see. Oh my gosh, have we really gone 20 minutes that fast?
There's so much to talk about.
Okay, well, then let's end on this idea. So after this latest conference, in fact, hold on, so we got a question or a comment. Let's see. Well, since I don't yet speak, it looks like French, I cannot comment, but
Mon Dieu.
But I will say this, though. I get asked a lot when I'm always covering these different topics, and I appreciate your shout out to US Tomorrow, the Catalyst Talks, the work I do in Grayline. Seems like I'm all over the place. People ask me, where do I get my news? Where do I get this input of information? What are the books I'm reading or movies I'm watching? So I'll give you a second to think about how you would answer it.
Sure.
What I would say to that is, first of all, the two books I'm reading right now is Walter Isaacson's book, Leonardo da Vinci. It's fabulous. I recommend it to anybody. And then right before that, I read David Epstein's book on range, how generalists are thriving in a world of specialists. Great. And it really obviously resonated with me because I specialize in nothing but talk about everything. Yeah. And so for you, when people ask you, where do you get your information, your news, how would you answer that?
I subscribe all across the range, from ultra conservative to ultra liberal and everything in between. I don't really buy this argument that, you can only get it from one source. You have to acknowledge your own biases and acknowledge that news entities are going to have theirs, and then do your homework and make your own opinion. So, I subscribe to 20 different news kind of pieces a day, and just
are you a podcaster as well?
No, I that's not my medium of choice, and I really respect people who do them. I think it's an art, but yeah, I'd rather just read it so I can flip and move on.
I'm one of those people that have constantly got to have information coming in at all times.
Yeah.
I mean, if I walk into a room and you know who, I can't say Alexa's too loud.
That's right.
Alexa. Oops. Anyway, but if I do, I've got to ask her for the latest news. I got to ask her for the latest thing. Make Me Smart is one of my favorite things. If you ever ask your device, because it comes from Marketplace on NPR. So that's what Molly Wood and Kai Ryssdal, and now this week Kimberly Adams. And they also have an Austin-based reporter. I forget his name. Sorry. Anyway. So, all right, well, that was like the fastest 22 minutes I've had in a very long time. Yeah. But it's no surprise because talking to you is always interesting. We covered a lot of ground. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this into rev.com. If you haven't used Rev, I highly recommend it. So I can pull the transcript and the nuggets out of everything that we talked about, and then throw those keywords over into a LinkedIn post. Or if there's anything else that you want to add or we didn't cover, by all means, throw it over to me and I'll throw it in that LinkedIn post as well.
Well, just one quick thing. I wanted to give a shout out to Donut Economics. That's the book that I'm reading right now by Kate Rayworth. And it's about reimagining 21st century economics. So again, I'm just on this path of we have to re-examine every single system, flip it upside down and fix it.
Yeah. Well, I could not agree more in that regard. So, all right. Well, I'm going to sign off, and then I'll stick around with you in the green room for a minute and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Joseph. Always fun.
Thank you.